Good morning and welcome to our webinar on Luximo. Thank you ever so much for those of you joining us live this morning, and hello to anyone watching on catch up. We're delighted to be talking to you about Luximo today. As you'll be aware, Luximo gained approval for use in GB in June, so just over a year ago now. And market research has shown there's been a really strong uptake of people quite keen to give Luximo a try in its first season, with around half of growers in blackgrass and ryegrass areas actually trying some Luximo, which is really encouraging. We're really keen to talk to you about experiences from its first season of use, looking at the season itself in terms of grass weed control, and in particular to answer any questions that you might have. So for about the next 40 minutes, I'll shortly introduce you to our two speakers for today. We'll run through the presentation, and then at the end, we'll take any questions that you might have. So our two speakers for today are the esteemed Mr. Steve Dennis, who is Head of Business and Technical Development at BASF, and the wonderful Stu Keevis, who is our Luximo technical guru, who is Business Development Manager for cereal herbicides and PGRs. So without further ado, I will now hand you over to Stu to get things started. Hi, Stu.
Welcome, everybody. Just going to show you a quick glance of the agenda and what we intend to cover over the next 40 or so minutes. I will cover the first three topics on here before I will hand over to Steve, who will sort of do a bit of a bigger dive into how to optimize control and with Luximo. I will come back then at the end, talk a little bit around IPM, and then show some of the trial results that we had from last season. So just in terms of the first three topics that I'm going to cover now, we're just going to give you a bit of a reminder of the offer that we sell into the market. We're going to dial back 12 months and just refresh you of the key messages that we were talking about when we were launching Luximo this time last year. And then just as a sort of a bit of a build up to Steve's session, I'll just look at the 22-23 season. We're also discussing the harvest and harvest conditions right now, but just going to dial us back a little bit to what harvest 22 was like and the autumn conditions in autumn 22 were like, just to sort of help build into the session that Steve is then going to run. So just as a reminder for you what we sell. So our offer into the main market is Luxinem Plus plus Stomp Aqua. They come together in one box. So one bottle of the Luxinem Plus, 2 bottles of the Stomp Aqua. Luxinem Plus is contains the active ingredient Luximo. You will hear us talking about Luximo during the presentation. That is the active ingredient that is within Luxinem Plus. And then Stomp Aqua is the BASF pendimethalin. So that's just a little bit of a reminder of what we say, and just to sort of refresh with you when we talk about Luximo as well. So if we dial ourselves back 12 months, and we were launching Luximo into the market, we sort of tried to highlight 3 key messages for Luximo in the launch. The first of those was that with Luximo, we were introducing a new mode of action into cereals into the UK market for the control of blackgrass and ryegrass. We were quite clear that Luximo itself, the active ingredient simethicillin, was not a new molecule, but it had taken until 2017 for our German scientists re-looking at the molecule to actually identify what that mode of action was. And in doing that, they discovered that actually it was a new mode of action. So when they proposed a paper and proposed that new mode of action into the scientific world. It was accepted and it was put as a new mode of action on the HRAC poster. So that is HRAC group 30, inhibition of fatty acid thioesterase. And what is key here, that this new mode of action is very different to other similar, other soil residual herbicides that we commonly use in the UK market, like flufenicet, prosulfocarb, triolate, etc. So Luximo is acting in a different part on the plant cell, and that is very key. So it really is a new tool helping you with grassweed management and resistance management as well. The next key message we look to show is that how effective Luximo is in controlling blackgrass. Before the launch of Luximo, growers were very used to using soil residual herbicides as part of their grassweed management in winter cereals, and predominantly these were based on a flufenicet base to those programs, and then other active ingredients were added onto those. So flufenicet was the key active ingredient that was the base that people were using for grassweed control. So we looked at the comparison between using solo Luximo versus solo flufenicet, just to get an idea of how good Luximo was. And in over 5 years worth of trials, over 120 trials, we got this sort of delta diagram where everything above that black line, the Luximo outperformed flufenicet. And as you can see, for the vast majority of those trial sites, Luximo was outperforming flufenicet. If you took an average, we were getting on average over 20 percentage points better control from Luximo than we were from flufenicet. So this really sort of reinforced our message that Luximo needs to become the base of your pre-emergence programs going forward. You certainly add other chemistry onto it for good sustainability and good resistance management, but it is a clear step on from what you were able to get from a flufenicet-based program. And then the third part of the message that we were keen to show, that it isn't just blackgrass control, that we're getting very good effect with Luximo. Our data set was actually even better in terms of the solo control of Luximo versus flufenicet for the control of Italian ryegrass as well. This is also where the active ingredient is used in Australia, the other country in the world where we have a registration at the moment. And here in the UK, we've had very, very good results for ryegrass control with Luximo. We will come back to both blackgrass and ryegrass a bit later in the presentation when I talk to you about some of this year's trial results. But they were the three messages that we had at launch last year: a new mode of action into UK cereals, a building block that is better than the current flufenicet, and it wasn't just blackgrass, it was ryegrass that it works very effective on. So then we're sort of now just carrying on thinking back the last 12 months and just sort of just doing a little bit of a recap of the season. If you put your mind back 12 months, you will remember that we had a pretty hot, dry summer. The harvest conditions were a lot better than a lot of people would say for what we've had right now. In fact, I looked into the ADAS crop action report for their review of harvest 2022. And they said there that, you know, it was a relatively early harvest, and an estimated 95% of the crops were harvested by the 23rd of August, which was faster than the 5-year average. That information, plus actually good information on harvest progress, if you want to see that, is also available on the AHDB website for anybody to look up on that. The good harvest conditions, what that allowed is some people to think a little bit about drilling that slightly earlier. But one of the bigger impacts of those drier conditions that we had last September was we were really struggling to get chit of blackgrass in our stale seed beds. You get to a point where you can't wait anymore and you want to get in with the drill and drill the crops. But unfortunately, that did have a knock-on effect later in the season, that we did not get that flush of blackgrass that we were able to take out with glyphosate. Combination of some slightly early drilling also meant that some of the pre-emergence chemistry also went on in slightly drier conditions. It's well known that soil residual chemistry does like a little bit of moisture for better activity. Then we did get significant rainfall events around about that sort of third week of October across a lot of the country. And what these conditions sort of all led to us was how important actually IPM is in part of your grass weed management. And I will come back to that a little bit later. But actually, anecdotal sort of discussion around the end of the year was that grass weed control from soil residual chemistry was good. We then went into the new year, January, sort of February 2023, and we had a very warm, dry February this year, much warmer and drier than normal. And this sort of meant when crops are normally trying to sort of get up and get going, they were probably just being held back a little bit by the lack of moisture. But then we made up for that moisture in what was then a very, very wet March. So what we did then see a little bit when blackgrass did start to emerge in the crops and was suddenly more visible in that sort of May time was surviving blackgrass plants from the autumn residual program probably had got a little bit of a head start in that early spring season and had been able to tiller very well and become actually some very, very big plants. Some of our agronomy managers, when they were walking around and looking at blackgrass, collected plants that were over 100 tillers. So those were some absolutely huge plants where they had that space to sort of thrive into. But there was also, I think, a spring germination element as well, with the conditions that we had with that sort of dry February into wet March that allowed a spring chit as well. And that is also backed on to then the fact that the relative poor performance of the chit in the stale seed beds and not being able to take out that blackgrass before drilling and the impact that had. So that sort of then summarizes a little bit from the weather for the main growing season. I don't really need to go into the harvest right now as such. So with that, I will now pass over to Steve, who will now take you through the next section. So over to you, Steve.
Stu thought he was handing over to Steve, but Steve's computer has decided to freeze. So he's just doing a little restart, slight technical hitch, and we'll be back with us shortly, we hope. If not, Stu likes these next slides anyway, so he can always take us away if need be. But whilst we wait for Steve to resolve his technical issues, Stu, could you maybe expand a little bit on differences between blackgrass and ryegrass in the season? So you talked a little bit about potential spring germination, the vigour of those autumn survivors. Are there any kind of key differences that we noticed in the season between those two key weeds?
Yeah, I think, there's information out there, and the various independent institutes will provide you plenty of information on these weeds. They really are the weed biology experts. So NIAB, ADAS, Rothamsted, have plenty of information on this. What we know with ryegrass is a much more vigorous plant. We've designed it and bred it to be like that. So actually it is a much more difficult weed because of that. And its establishment pattern can be much more protracted, making it a little bit more difficult to control from that point of view. So we have classically seen that more protracted germination pattern from ryegrass through the autumn and into that early spring. What you have to sort of realize with your soil residual chemistry is that you have a defined window range of persistence of that product in the soil where it's actually going to do its job. That will depend on the weather characteristics, that will depend on your soil characteristics, and when you applied those products. So where you've got grass weeds that are continuously emerging, you've sort of got to look at how you can keep the chemical activity going for as long as possible. You've also got to understand with both blackgrass and ryegrass whether your post-emergence contact graminicides are working or not. Do you have, what is your resistance status on your fields? I think it is very important that you test fields, not just one field, and assume that is your status for the whole farm, because the populations can vary from field to field. They can even vary from within the field. So having an idea at least by field of what your resistance status is helps arm you to how you can tackle these weeds going forward. In terms of the IPM differences, we talk a lot about IPM cultural control techniques for blackgrass, and a lot of the literature is in and around that. But ryegrass work is being done, and we're trying to catch up as much as we can. The basic advice right now is to do the very same things that you're doing for your blackgrass in terms of delayed drilling, creating stale seed beds, etc. They just might not be slightly as effective. I've seen on my screen, I think Mr. Dennis is back, so
I think so.
I can stop waffling now and hopefully hand
Good
over
filler,
to Steve.
Stu, good filler. Steve, do we have you?
I hope you can hear me. Good morning, everybody. And thank you for filling very ably, Stu, in my absence. And thank you from my side as well for everyone for joining us this morning. We really do appreciate your time, but also in your interest in this topic as well. And one of the things I'm often asked about Luximo is really how to get the best from this chemistry, because I'll show you in a minute the sort of performance you can expect from Luximo compared to the other key players in the market. And what you'll see straight away is we're not talking about 100% control here. We're talking about the best performance you can achieve from using chemistry. So the question I often get is, how do I maximize the performance? And we'll talk about that a little bit, and I'm sure Stu already had. But my key answers to those is use pre-emergence, and as Stu has said, use of IPM as well. And in this context, IPM primarily means delayed drilling. And what I mean by delayed drilling is nothing to do with the calendar. It's about delaying the drilling of your crop until black grass has come through. And that will vary when that is from year to year. So make sure you've had a significant germination prior to you drilling your crop. And the other key thing about IPM really is considering the whole rotation and not just considering the standing crop that's in the ground at the moment. And that's one thing I want to just develop over the next 10 minutes or so as we think about that. And to do that, I want to just fix in our minds the kind of control levels that we would expect. Because when we've done that and you've got some numbers, you can actually start to work on this. And I'll show you a model in a minute where you can actually use some of your own local information and build the sort of control figures you need to get and to achieve the best performance for your own land. So what we've got there on the screen is a scale going from low 70s up to 100, and that is the percent blackgrass control that you need to achieve. And just to give you some ideas and some context, really, I'll now put on the performance in 56 trials over 3 years, so a very robust set of data of the performance you can expect from a Liberator clonophen mix, low 70s, and then a 10, 12, 15% more control from a Luximo Stomp Aqua DFF type treatment. And when you look at that, what you can see is clearly Luximo is the best active ingredient. I mean, that is consistently shown, and I think the market generally accepts that now. But you're in this world where actually you're still not quite good enough in terms of performance always. Sometimes you will be, and sometimes actually a Luximo pre-emergence under good conditions will get you to more or less 100% control, but you can't rely on that. So it's what do we do around that to achieve the sort of levels of control we need to. So one option is Avadex, of course. So let's put Avadex onto the Liberator or clonophen. And over a lot of trials, what we're seeing is that an Avadex, Liberator clonophen, an Avadex crystal, those sorts of treatments are getting us to a similar level to what a Luximo treatment can do without Avadex. So even with that big input there, you're still not getting to the sustainable levels of control you need to achieve. And of course, you can use Avadex on top of your Luximo treatment as well. So all of these are pre-emergence of the crop, of course, and you can see now we're getting into the 90s and getting much closer to where we need to be in terms of blackgrass control. Some of you, of course, are still using post-emergence treatments, and that will vary depending on your population and the level of control you can get. We're often seeing performance around 5, 6, 10% points uplift, and you can see there what you can do with your Liberator-based treatment. Again, you can do that with Luximo, so that is Luximo with a follow-up post-em is giving you better control than a Liberator clonophen plus Avadex plus a post-em. And of course, you've got that option with Luximo as well. So those are just some sort of percent control figures, and you may want to make a mental note of the sort of numbers that you can achieve with those treatments. Because actually, once you've got those numbers, you can actually start to build with your own populations and get the kind of performance that you need to achieve. And the reason I'm telling you that is not so much to show how much better Luximo is, although it is, but I want you to be able to build and actually do work in terms of your own populations and be able to calculate the sort of situations that you're working in. Because really, quoting a percent control figure is only giving you an insight into the current year, into the standing crop. And of course, you all know the reason you're on this call is because you're getting to understand blackgrass well. And one of the things you're understanding is that it's a multi-year, isn't it? It's a rotational management project. It's not something where just controlling one crop is the answer. And added to that, there's extra complexity, isn't there? Because not every crop can have the option of a Luximo. For example, you might have oilseed rape in your rotation, or beans, or winter barley where you can't use Luximo. So you need to think about the whole rotation. And of course, it's well known that suboptimal control in any one year can lead to implications for years to come. And for those reasons, we actually would recommend that you log into the NIAB Artist Blackgrass Economic Model, because by doing that, you can put your own figures in and start to look at what the performance requirements you have for herbicides on your farm. So let's have a think about this. And I'm going to just go through one worked example. Again, you can do this with your own land and do your own calculations using the NIAB artist model. And I'm just going to do a worked example here, which is not a high pressure. So this is not something where we've picked a very, very difficult example to show that you need the most effective herbicides. This is actually a low blackgrass pressure situation. This is just 5 heads per square meter of blackgrass. And then I'm going to look at a reasonably typical rotation where we've got 2 crops of winter wheat, 1 of spring barley to get all the benefits of that in terms of cleaning, and then 2 more crops of wheat. And we are using IPM in this model as well. So we are delayed drilling, and this is direct drilling, directly drilled crops as well. So my question to you then, my rhetorical question to you, is if you had a population of 5 heads per square meter, you grew that rotation under those conditions, what sort of population would you expect of blackgrass after that? So in other words, how many seedlings would you expect to germinate in the crop that follows that rotation? And that's something that the NIAB artist model can help you with. So remember what we're looking at here. We're looking at 2 crops of wheat, and we are using either Luximo or Liberator clonophen to give an idea of 2 control levels. We're looking at 1 crop of spring barley, which is a cleaning crop. That's a crop where it's the ultimate example of delayed drilling, really. So we're getting all of the benefits in that crop in terms of late drilling. But in addition, we are giving a notional 80% control for the herbicide in the spring barley. And that's the same for both treatment comparisons, the spring barley, and then 2 more wheat crops. And you can see along the bottom, I've got the same scale in terms of performance for herbicide. But the very first thing to say before I put any data on, the maths when it comes to blackgrass are absolutely brutal. They really are. And you've only got to look the scale up the left-hand side. You can see that scale's going up to 2,500. And that is the number of seedlings that can emerge after 5 crops, even if you only started with 5 heads per square meter. And you are using good herbicides in that crop as well. And you are using IPM. It kind of shows just how important this is in terms of managing. So let's put some different herbicide regimes on and see what we can achieve. So remember, percent control along the bottom. We've got 72% control there from Liberator clonophen. We've got 84% control from Luximo PDM plus DFF. And straight away you can see that you've actually got significantly less than half the population of blackgrass emerging in the 6th crop after 5 crops, 4 of which have been based around Luximo and 1 spring barley. So you can see that sort of difference, that 12% control difference there is having an absolutely dramatic effect in terms of the blackgrass burden that you're picking up in your field. But you can also see straight away that you've started with 5 heads per square meter. And now even with Luximo, you're looking at over 500 plants per square meter emerging in that crop. So we are, even with that level of control, we are still increasing our blackgrass burden, even with the best techniques that are there. So we do need to build other herbicides around it. So let's build some of those on. Let's look at adding on, for example, Avadex. And you can see there what I showed you earlier. Avadex, that may well, and of course, conditions will vary in terms of the performance of Avadex, but you can expect to get that to lift a flufenicet-based treatment to roughly around about the Luximo performance level. But as we've said a number of times, that's still not enough. We're still increasing the burden on the field. Again, we can add Avadex, of course, now using Luximo as well. And you can see now that by adding Avadex to Luximo, we're starting to get to more sustainable levels. We're starting to get to levels where we're beginning to maintain the blackgrass population more or less in the same area we're starting. We're starting to get sustainable maintenance of blackgrass population in that land. You could do that with a post stem with Luximo as well if you're not able to use Avadex or it's not convenient for you to do that on your farm. But again, we can see sustainable controls by those methods. Maybe you could do that with a Liberator program with Avadex and post stem. But just think of the cost of what that chemistry is there. With Liberator, Clonophen, Avadex, and a post stem treatment. That is a significant investment, but you can see the kind of performance that can be achieved. And really, I would say there is only one way now to affordably get that sustainable blackgrass control that you need. You need to be using IPM. You need to be delaying your drilling beyond what you can achieve, beyond when the blackgrass emergence is, however late that is. And we need to be using spring cropping in there as well. But beyond that, we must be using Luximo as well. That residual chemistry, the lower risk chemistry. We should be using other active ingredients, other mode of actions, other methods of uptake of the herbicide around it as well. And we should be using Luximo pre-emergence as well. So that is really the way for sustainable blackgrass control, to start with Luximo. So with that, I'd really like to hand back to Stu now. Stu, to bring us through for the rest of the presentation. So thank you, Stu.
Insight when you start using these models, and as Steve said, you see how brutal the maths really is on that. I think we've mentioned IPM a lot already in the discussion. I'm just going to very quickly just cap all that together as well. We've been very clear as BSF, even with the launch of a new molecule, new mode of action, that is very effective in the market, that you must still use your cultural control techniques. If you're an area that has target site resistance and your post-stem graminicides are not working anymore, from a chemistry point of view, you're solely relying on your soil residual chemistry. And really, for that to work effectively, you must be using cultural control techniques, getting a chit in those stale seed beds, getting a delayed drilled crop to reduce the blackgrass emergence, not necessarily late drilled, but delayed drilled. Because as last autumn showed, some of those building blocks start to not work very effectively. We don't get a chit in the stubble, or we drill slightly earlier. You're just putting potentially too much pressure on the chemistry, which can be very good. But as we sort of said, it is a very, very brutal numbers game at the end of the day. So we as BSF, we have an IPM game plan. This is available on our website. It's also available in our Luximo brochure as well. The messages on here are all the standard industry standard type of messages. There's nothing absolutely new in that respect, but it is essential that these are taken on board and look to utilize as part of your overall grassweed management program going forward. So next with that, we're just going to start maybe looking at some of trial results from this last year and a little bit of a sort of an overall summary that we have of that. So first of all, some blackgrass. This is a site that we had down in Bedfordshire. last year. It was a high pressure site, as you can see, over 600 heads per meter squared. And what you see here is we got some very different level of control between these two treatments. So you have a Liberator plus a clonophen treatment on the left, which at the final assessment was giving 40% control. And you have then a Luximo plus Pendi and DFF on the right hand side, which was giving 85% control. I think so that shows two things. First of all, the value that Luximo has. It really is a powerful, effective tool and is clearly the market leader in terms of soil residual blackgrass control. But it also just shows you a little bit what we're talking around the IPM as well in terms of blackgrass pressure. This percentage level of control that we were getting in trials last year was very much in line with what we've been seeing throughout the whole development process with Luximo. So we were getting in our trials the sort of levels of percent control that we would expect. But in those trials, we probably had just higher blackgrass populations this last year than some of the years before, because of the drier conditions, the lack of a stale seedbed and a blackgrass chit as well. So in relative terms, the performances actually were the same. And when we actually look to sort of summarize that data set and bring that into a review across the number of years, what we have here is we're looking at these three treatments. So what will come up in a grey bar will be a Liberator, a clonophen, then we'll have a Crystal plus DFF treatment, and then we'll have a Luximo plus Pendi plus DFF treatment. And what we've got here again is a very robust data set. This is 78 trials across the last 4 years. But you'll see critically it also includes this last season as well. So when we look at the Liberator or clonophen control that we've got over those last 4 years, you'll see in the first 2 years we were sort of getting that sort of mid-70s. In that 21-22 season, we had a drop, and you'll see we had that drop in all the chemistry that autumn. But actually, this last autumn, in terms of percent control, we were back up to where we expect to be with that treatment in terms of overall control. So our 4-year mean is just shy of 73% for Liberator plus a clonophen. When we compare that side by side with Crystal plus DFF treatment, just as a reminder, Crystal is BSF flufenicet plus pendimethalin. You'll see that actually each one of those last 4 years, the Crystal plus DFF treatment has outperformed, maybe very slightly, but outperformed the Liberator plus a clonophen treatment as well. So our over 4-year mean actually shows Crystal plus DFF being just shy of 75%. So the difference in those treatments, they both have flufenicet in, they both have DFF in. It's a comparison really between pendimethalin and a clonophen. And that is basically telling you there that pendimethalin is as good as a clonophen as a partner for grass weed control when mixed with flufenicet. Then, of course, we add in the Luximo element. And here, you know, again, this has been very consistent over those last 4 years that we are getting a significant uplift in control when using Luximo. We got that dip again in that 21-22 season, like all the chemistry, but then it sort of bounced back in this last autumn as well. So the 4-year mean there is showing us 85% control. And if you look across the 4 years, again, it is very consistent that we're getting this 12 percentage point uplift when using a Luximo-based pre-emergence versus a flufenicet-based pre-emergence. And as Steve has sort of shown you, that value that will give back to you in your rotation across your wheat crops, across your rotation, it has a strong value to you in terms of reducing your grass weed pressure in those fields. So that's why, you know, we clearly will state that, you know, using Luximo plus pre-em in your winter wheat crop in the autumn is a real step up and should become the base for your blackgrass control programs going forward. The data's pretty damn robust, we think, for that, and really shown very consistently the level of performance that we're getting with Luximo. But as I said in our catch up right at the start, it's not just about blackgrass. It is also about ryegrass, and this really is one of those pictures paints 1,000 words slides, because it doesn't need a huge amount of explanation above what you can see on the slide there. This is a farmer's sort of split field trial that was carried out in the Nottinghamshire area this last year. You can see in that bottom left, in that untreated little block down there, huge pressure of ryegrass in that field. You can see that on the right hand side that the Liberator plus Pendy treatment really was struggling to provide any sort of decent level of control at all. But just having Luximo, Luximum plus Stomp Aqua as a treatment in that trial, you can see absolutely chalk and cheese the value that that was bringing for ryegrass control in that field. By no means is it 100%, absolutely, but in terms of helping to get on top of that problem, that really is showing you the power that Luximo can bring for ryegrass control. So to summarise a little bit, and then we can open up for the Q&A session. Our data set really is showing that we are getting consistent performance from using Luximo year in, across different years, across different soil types, across different grassweed pressures. We're getting very consistent performance from using Luximo. We're consistently showing that it is superior to flufenicet, and that we must really become the pre-em building block for your grassweed control going forward. And it has that value across the rotation. The 12 percentage point uplift that we see from using Luximo versus a flufenicet based program will have value across your rotation in your wheat crops to really get on top of grassweed pressure and get it down to a manageable level, or maintain it if you're already there, maintain it at a manageable level as well. So for us, that just emphasizes the need that a Luximo based treatment must become the building block, pre-em building block for your grassweed management program. I think with that, I will look to hand back to Jane, who will now take us through any questions that you may have asked.
Thank you very much, Stu. So thank you very much for your patience, everyone. Slight technical hitch in the middle there, but nice bit of extra insight from Stu on ryegrass versus blackgrass. So we've had quite a few questions through already. Please do ask any that you'd like. So if you click ask a question below the screen, and then just pop that through, and that will come to the speakers. So first up, I'd like to have a question for you, Stu, I think, from Mr. Poolfog. Any comments on optimum application settings, water volume, nozzles, boom height, or forward speed?
We as BSF don't have a standard you must spray like this. I think the important thing is to make sure that you're set up very correctly, that you're achieving a good level of coverage. Our key thing is that soil residual chemistry needs to get to the soil, needs a good coverage on the soil for it to be able to be just permeate the soil, topsoil level just a little bit to get into the root, seed and shoot of the grass weed. So the coverage is absolutely optimal. What we would say is it is best to apply pre-emergence. So the farm logistics that you may have on any individual farm in terms of being able to drill and then being able to get on and apply pre-emergence get that chemistry on at that time will give you the best results. We've looked at a range of the water volumes that you have on the label. We've looked at different nozzle types, and our view is we're neutral on those. Use what you need to use on your farm, but try and get it on with a good coverage and pre-emergence.
Thanks, Stu. So directly linked to that coverage comment, a follow-up question from Paul. A lot of straw has been chopped this harvest. Any comments on the impact of straw residues on herbicide performance?
Yeah, I mean, again, this would be very general to all soil residual herbicides, not specific to Luximo Plus, but to all of them. Soil residual herbicides, the key in there is the word soil. That's where they need to get to. Generally, the vast majority of them work with uptake in either the root, seed, or shoot. So that's generally happening underground, under the soil layers. They need to get to the soil to be effective. Anything that's on the surface that acts as a barrier potentially has an impact on performance with that. So there's a balance between having trash on the surface for organic matter, etc., trying to do things that way. But you also need to remember how to optimize and get the best out of the chemistry. It needs to get to the soil to work best.
Thanks, Stu. A question that I'll give to you, Steve, because I'm nice like that. Is Luximo plus flufenicet a good anti-resistance strategy for controlling blackgrass?
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, and thank you for the question. It's a question that comes up from time to time, really, in terms of resistant management strategy. And I get the sentiment for the question, but just a little bit before I directly answer that, is that, of course, a strategy is not just one intervention. And I'm sure what the questioner really meant was, is it a good partner as part of a anti-resistance strategy? And I'll directly answer that in a moment. But in terms of a strategy, it's about using all the IPM tools. And I'm not going to apologize for the number of times we've used the term IPM in this call. It's because it's not just single faceted, it's multifaceted, and it's got so many benefits for all of us in terms of the whole industry. It's not just an environmental concept, but it is that. It's much more. It's about protecting the chemistry we've got, but it's also about maximizing the performance that we can achieve on that field. So IPM is really our friend in terms of blackgrass control and blackgrass resistance management, because in terms of the resistance strategy, we are reducing the number of plants that we are exposing to the chemistry each time that we spray. So to take the question literally, I don't think it is a strategy, but to then take the question in the spirit in which I think it is meant, is it a good partner? Well, it's one of a number of partners that could be used. And actually, what is the best partner in terms of resistance management? Well, it's what gives you the highest level of control. Because ultimately, when we're talking about potentially metabolic resistance, it's all about having the fewest survivors that you can have come through it. And I don't know that flufenicet particularly is better than others. We've obviously done a huge amount of work tank mixing with flufenicet with Luximo. We don't find in our own work that that's particularly superior to pendimethalin as a partner. Therefore, flufenicet could be used, but actually pendimethalin is the most convenient and actually is the one that we feel is the most for where we are at the market at the moment, the way blackgrass is at the moment, is the appropriate partner. And actually, I see there's a question coming on about stacking with Liberator, which maybe I could draw into this as well, because we're talking about use of Luximo with flufenicet. And I wonder actually in terms of resistance management technique, that could be a better one in terms of tank rather than specifically tank mixing, where you've got a second application where you've actually got an idea where you're controlling your blackgrass pre-emergence with your Luximo, and then coming relatively quickly back with either a crystal, for example, or a liberator, another source of flufenicet following it. And some of the work I showed earlier in the artist model bit, the post-end follow-ups actually were liberator or crystal or something of that nature in those trials. So actually it is a good approach to build, and I think that's probably a more natural way of going than actually using a tank mix with flufenicet.
Thanks, Steve. Was there anything you wanted to add to that, Stu, or has Steve covered it all?
No, I think Steve's covered that very well.
Perfect. So yeah, in terms of flufenicet, good consideration for a sequence or for a follow-up, but our trials data has shown that as a partner, you know, pendimethalin is a convenient partner and an optimum partner for Luximo. Another question, so this is one for you, Stu, I think, because I think you mentioned it earlier. So you've mentioned the use of simethicillin in Australia. Have they seen any resistance issues yet? And how long have they been using it?
So I believe Australia, they've had approval for around about 5 years, I think now. They've been using it over there. Their establishment is very different. How they establish crops over there from a soil moisture point of view is very different to us here in the UK, and actually their ryegrass species is slightly different as well. But have they seen any resistance commercially in growers' fields in Australia? No. But like here in the UK, they have institutes that do a lot of work and a lot of studies with all the active ingredients. So in artificial environments, they are trying to look into the mechanisms, and if you like, trying to test active ingredients to destruction from that point of view. So there's been papers published from Australia. They're very active in grassweed and weed resistance management, their institute. So there's research papers on the topic, but in terms of commercially in the field, no.
Great, thank you, Stu. So we've got a couple more questions in the chat, but we are coming to the end now. So if you have any more questions, please do pop them into the chat to have a chance to put them forward to our experts. So I guess another one for you, Stu, probably quite a short one. You mentioned use in wheat, but not barley. What about rye applications?
Yes, we have approval in winter wheat, but we have no approval in winter barley. Rye, at the moment, we have no approval. Obviously, we are also looking to launch Luximo into Europe as well. Believe that they may be looking at Luximo use in rye crops. They have a much bigger area of rye in Europe than we grow here in the UK. So we may look to wait and see what sort of approvals they get and whether we want to mutually recognise into that crop here in the UK at a later date is a possibility. But currently it is just winter wheat for the autumn crops.
Okay. And the final question that we have in the chat, I have some green blackgrass plants in peas at the moment. When does seed become viable? Some of these plants are flowering now. And I will give that to you, Stu, as well, I think.
Okay. I mean, as we said before, I mean, blackgrass, if the conditions are right, it will grow. And like any grass plant, so like your wheat as well, it's going to flower. You're going to get grain development and maturation. So depending on the conditions, it's warmer now, so it will probably become viable quicker, potentially. But I would say as well, by all means, reach out. If you've got a specific question like that, by all means, reach out to the independent institutes who much better at weed biology than I am, and can probably give you a very concise answer, a more detailed answer on that. But it's potentially got the potential to become viable pretty soon, and shed that seed back onto the ground.
I think
Okay.
one comment from me on that is, if you are seeing in a weed population some that flowering, then there's every chance that there's some that's more developed than just flowering. So I would anticipate there could be some seed that's viable pretty soon if there isn't already.
Okay. Oh, we've had two that just snuck in here at the end. So let me just read these quickly. So, is there an application rate that hits the sweet spots? I see 100 to 300 litres was mentioned.
The short answer is no. You can do these type of trials and you can get different results, different years from that. If you try and keep everything else similar. As I said before, I think the key thing is to have a application rate that suits your farm logistics, that enable you to apply the product pre-emergence. I think that would be more key, that you're able to get it on, get your field sprayed at a pre-emergence. So whether you're someone that likes to use 200 litres or higher, or you're someone that's at a lower water volume rate, people have their favourites in terms of nozzles, what they think work best for them. So just making sure, as I said before, that you're getting good coverage and you're able to get on pre-emergence.
Okay. And the final question, I think, to bring us into 9 o'clock finish, how does the half-life of Luximo compare with actives like flufenicet and aclonophen when considering post-M timing?
I don't think the post-M timing part of it is really the key part there. The half-life of the active ingredients is the half-life of the active ingredients. And actually, Luximo has a very similar half-life to flufenicet. So these are the two actives with the biggest level of control. So we've already shown you that obviously Luximo is a significant step up from flufenicet, but in terms of their half-life, they're very, very similar. I think clonophen, off the top of my head, clonophen's half-life is much longer, more in that sort of pendimethalin and diflufenacin type of range as well. But in terms of the activity, the level of control, Luximo is significantly more, giving you more control.
It's just a comment from me on that, and things like half-lives are very useful in terms of understanding the nature of the chemical, but actually they don't really tell you an awful lot in terms of what the performance of the herbicide will be, because to really understand that, you need to understand the half-life of the chemistry. You need to understand how that relates to the temperature and the soil moisture you have in your own location. But you also need to understand the performance of the herbicide and how that drops off with half-life. Just to be able to say you've got a long half-life, so there is chemistry still there, doesn't tell you a lot, depending on, unless you know what the level of performance of that amount of chemistry is. So whilst we're happy to share that information, it's not the biggest picture. What we need to understand is the inherent strength of the chemistry will always be more important than the length of the half-life.
Okay. So on that note, I think we're bang on 9 o'clock. So I think we will draw it to a close. If anybody has any questions they didn't have a chance to ask, my email address is in the chat with regards to basis points, or if you've got any questions you'd like me to put forward to Steve and Stu, just send me an email and we'll get back to you. So with that, thank you again ever so much for joining us, and it's a very busy time, and thank you to Steve and Stu for some excellent discussion. Basis points, please find the code to the left of me if you're watching on catch up to claim your points via the Basis website. And on that note, wish you a good day. and hopefully almost an end of harvest for you. Thank you very much.